This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura, Carlin.
And I'm Christie, Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Our guest is Gloria Feldt, a known expert on women, power, and leadership. Among her many accolades, awards, and accomplishments, Gloria is a past president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She's the author of 5 books. Her latest, Intentioning Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good, came out a few months ago. And as co-founder and president of Take the Lead, she's committed to propelling women to their fair share of leadership positions by, and yes, she put a date on it, 2025. But Gloria did not start out as a career-driven advocate for societal change. Rather, she was a 15-year-old mother in Texas, and that's not quite what you'd expect to hear. But she's going to tell us about her journey and her mission, and how we can intention our lives and careers. Gloria, welcome to The Balanced Dilemma.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you both.
Let's start at the beginning, because it's not the story of a woman who grew up, went to college, got a job, married, and then had a family. Is it fair to say you kind of did it in reverse?
That's exactly the way I describe it.
Can you tell us about, your early life and young motherhood?
So my teenage rebellion was to do what my mother did not do. My mother worked and mothers in those days did not go to the office and work, and my mother did. So, of course, my teenage rebellion was to do just the opposite. I grew up in small Texas towns where the culture did not encourage girls to have professions. And in fact, if you went to college, they would say it was to get your MRS. And I totally drank the Kool-Aid. I had started to school young, so I was I'm still the youngest in my class. We still joke about that. And I thought that it was really cool. The girls who were engaged in their teens were the ones who got all the attention. And I thought that would be really cool to get behind a picket fence, have a bunch of kids, take care of everybody. I mean, that's what I was acculturated to do.
But wasn't even back then 15 on the young side?
It was, and that's why I mentioned that I was the youngest in my class, and I was still quite young. It was a series of not such good choices, but we all make those in life.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it was legal.
Today it wouldn't be.
Right. And isn't it true that by the time you were just over 20, you had 3 children? Is that correct?
Yes. My youngest, my son, was born just after my 20th birthday. And it was at that moment that I somehow woke up. And my son has heard me tell this story so often. He calls himself Mom's light bulb and takes credit for it. I don't know exactly what happened, but I began to think about a wider world. I was always a smart kid. I always did well in school. I liked to study. I was very, I read a lot. And so my natural thirst for knowledge led me to enroll in the community college when my son was 4 months old.
Now, had you finished high school?
I finished high school by correspondence.
You did. And we should point out that you were, in fact, married to the father of your children for a long time.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, we did our best. We were together for 18 years. And I think, we tried really hard, but teenage marriages very often don't last forever. And that was our situation.
And it was in community college, that you really had a learning epiphany. Isn't that correct?
I began to study the civil rights movement, and I began to study racial issues in general. I got involved with some organizations that were in favor of expanding civil rights and ending segregation. I was in the South, remember that, in Texas, and I had an epiphany about how people can make change. And I saw that even people who didn't have any formal power, if they got together and they had a goal and they worked together, they could change things. And that was just a huge epiphany.
That wasn't part of your upbringing at all? You didn't get that from your parents?
I would say that my parents were always engaged in, they would have never not voted, for example. They were engaged in the community. My grandparents were engaged in the community. All four of my grandparents were immigrants who valued the democratic process very much. They would never have missed a vote. And I would say that they were probably more progressive than most, but they still pretty much operated within the culture that we lived in. So they didn't try to change things per se, but they were much more open to having colleagues and the rights of people who were of different races from us.
And your, let's say, the door opening moment with your connection with Planned Parenthood was an outgrowth of part of your studies in college. Is that correct?
Yes, in a circuitous way. I was volunteering for the local Head Start program when it first started, and I was offered a position in teaching. And in doing so, I became friendly with one of my co-teachers who was on the local Planned Parenthood board. It was a small affiliate in West Texas. It had just started a few years. I think it might have been, I don't know, it may have started the very same year that she told me about it. She asked me to be on a committee. I served on a committee. I did some little something. So I found out about the organization, but it didn't really become part of my life. Once the University of Texas opened a branch in Odessa, Texas, where I was living at the time. If anybody is fond of Friday Night Lights, it's really like that, folks. So when the University of Texas opened a branch there, I was able to go back to school to finish my teaching degree, and I had planned to be a high school social studies teacher. The last course I took was ecology, where I decided I would do my term paper on this new little Planned Parenthood affiliate. And so I went and I interviewed the executive director, I interviewed a nurse practitioner and some board members, and before I knew it, the executive director called me and said, "I'm leaving. I think you should submit a resume." So I thought, well, I'm graduating. I've never had a formal job interview before. I've never even had a resume. I don't know anything. I've never run an organization. I barely know anything about this organization other than the term paper that I did. But it'll be great experience. I'll do it, and I'm in no danger of being hired because I'm totally unqualified.
And you realize, Gloria, that your assessment of your lack of qualifications is exactly what they say about women when applying for jobs, that they've studied it, and if men have 2 of the 10 criteria, they think they're the best candidate, and when women have 8 and are missing 2, they think they're totally unqualified. So it's interesting that you put it in the way that you do, how you assessed it. Very typical to form.
One of the things that we've heard you speak about before is how growing up feeling like the other sort of transformed you and helped you. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I mentioned that all of my grandparents were immigrants. They were all from Eastern Europe, Latvia, and Lithuania, and we were always the only or one of the very few Jewish families in town. And so not only was that the case, but in a very I would say the first question people ask you in Central and West Texas, where I grew up, is, what church do you go to? And having to answer that question was always a bit fraught for me. But also my grandparents, who were very much a part of my life and always were with the family whenever we did things or school programs and things like that, they all spoke with thick accents. And so there were many questions that came up. So I always felt like I was very different. And I was very different, actually, from the other kids. And I hated it so much when I was growing up. But as I got older and more mature, what I began to understand is how grateful I became for having understood, having had that experience of being othered, has helped me to have much more empathy for other people who are in that situation. And I'm so grateful for that now.
You're listening to The Balanced Dilemma. We are speaking with Gloria Feldt.
Gloria, just launching off this feeling you had of being an other, you endeavored on a path of being a young mother, which was somewhat typical in your community, And then you did something really brazen and went to school and changed your whole life. Taking these new steps, did this make you stand out? Was your family supportive? What happened at that time?
My family was very supportive because they had always valued education and they always assumed that I would go to college. My ex-husband's family did not think it was a good idea, and they kind of looked down on it, but they didn't express strong opinions. And I was very careful during those early years. I took all my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays so that I would be away from the children a minimal amount of time. And I also I was fortunate enough that there was a young woman in the neighborhood who knew us well and knew the children and came to our house and took care of them while I was gone. So that was, I will say that it was a gradual process, actually, from where I started to where I ended up. I didn't just like immediately make huge changes. I was evolving rather than making a drastic change.
How many years did it take you to get your degree?
12 years.
Wow. And the kids, so you started, your youngest son was 4 months, and the others were young, under 5, right? And
yes.
How did they all handle this when you would be rushing to go to class or you had an assignment, all the things that we can relate to as being students? How did your children actually handle that process?
I think the children are very able to handle all sorts of situations as long as they're being fed and taken care of. They're pretty happy. I also was fortunate to live in a neighborhood at the time where neighbors were neighbors and people looked out for each other. And I had a next door neighbor who was a very close friend. She had children the same ages. And so we traded off quite a lot. I would say very often the children wouldn't even know I was gone.
So, Gloria, what's it like starting a career later in life?
Well, having not started it earlier in life, it's hard for me to make a comparison. But I will say that I believe that going to college when you are older and you have some life experience does have some benefit. And you have had some experiences that you're able to apply, and particularly if you have been in the working world some. I think that having had the experience of 5 years teaching Head Start, for example, made I finished my last 2 years in 1 year. I was so obsessed with getting done with the degree. But I really felt that having had some of that work experience made the educational process mean a great deal more to me. I learned more because of it. And so I can't really speak to what it's like to start later on. I just jumped into it and did what I had to do.
When you jumped in, did you have long-term goals or plans, or you just took this job and opportunity that came towards you?
It's funny that I wrote a book called Intentioning now.
Right. That's why the question.
I had such a focus on intention because truly I had a rather unplanned career. And my advice to young people is always just say yes to opportunities that come your way, because you never know where they will lead you, and you can always unchoose. You can always take a different path if something doesn't work out. I do think I do wish I had been more intentional about it, but you can't unscramble the eggs, and there's no experience in life that doesn't teach you something.
But some of this advice that we've heard many times, and it is particularly given to young women these days, that advice doesn't apply when you have children. Once you have a child, you're in. That's it. That's a lifelong job. And if you had to speak to your 20-year-old self, 15-year-old self, do you wish you'd taken a different path, or do you think that part of your charm has been to have done it backwards?
As I said, you can't unscramble the egg, so it's hard for me to know. Certainly, my children have been the center of my life. Now, I do compare sometimes with my sister, who was 5.5 years younger than me, and so literally we were of different generations. She had the pill. She had much more freedom. So she did it the way you're supposed to do it. And she ended up not having children at all. And I don't know what I would have done. It was just a different era. It was a different time. I can't imagine not having children. And I also think that children very much benefit from seeing their parents, their mothers, as well as their fathers, have interests in life, be learning, be working, be doing things that are meaningful to them. I think that's a super important role modeling for children.
And this would be, it would seem, part of your message in intentioning. And let's talk about that. How do you define intentioning? What does that mean to you?
I made it up because I was looking for exactly the right word to bridge from ambition to intention. Ambition is I wish, I hope, I want. Intention is you're darn right I'm doing it. I see it. It's happening. I will. There's no question about it. And I wanted to really reinforce that notion of intention, but I wanted to make it an active verb. And I went to the dictionary, the thesaurus, I Googled, and I couldn't come up with exactly the right word. So I turned intention into a verb, intentioning.
And how do we use that in our own lives?
It's a concept that I want women to use to elevate intentions. The previous book that I wrote before intentioning is called No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. And I've been teaching women through the last decade, really, how to shift their definition of power, change the power paradigm from the oppressive idea that the narrative of history is written from, which is the power over people and things and resources, to the power to make life better for ourselves, our family, our world, the children, whatever it is that is meaningful to you. And I would see women embrace that power to concept, and it enabled them to free up their thinking about who they are and what they could be and what they could achieve in the world. And so then I realized that there is a next question after you embrace your power. And that question is the power to what? How are you going to use that power? Because power is like a hammer. You can build something with it or you can break something apart. What are you going to do with it now that you know you have it? Intentioning is that next step. Intentioning is designed to help women not only embrace their power, but to answer the question, the power to what, and then to elevate that level of intention that they have to realize they can probably do even more than they ever thought.
This is The Balanced Dilemma with Gloria Feldt. Gloria, you have a chapter titled, You've Always Had the Power, My Dear, and there's just like the Good Witch and Wizard of Oz. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is that we all have more power than we know we have. And I think this is probably true of everyone, male and female, both. Although, boys are still socialized to believe they own the world, and they believe it from the moment they come out of the womb, and you can see that in their behavior. Girls are still socialized to be more attentive to how their behavior is affecting other people, to be nice, to sit in line, to be still, be small. And so we often lose track of the fact that we have that power, and it's inside of us. Because when we are objectified and when we are judged by our external behavior, the locus of power can be taken outside of ourselves, and we may lose track of what power we actually do have. So that's what I mean by that. You have the power. You just may not realize you do, and you may not realize your assets. And when I'm doing training or when I'm speaking, I often have people do an exercise called Your Points of Power, in which they literally sit down and they make a list of just, what are the unique things that you have that you bring to your life, to your work, to your family, whatever. And what are those points of power that you have? What are the resources that you have? What's the knowledge you have? What's the capability that you have? And very often we don't really value those as much. And I think one of the most important things for women, which I really focus on in my speaking and training, is to first know the value they bring. When you know the value you bring, then you can know your power, and that's really what it's all about. Then you can do anything.
This is so interesting. It brings up so many thoughts. A phrase that was in Lean In that we refer to a lot is relentlessly pleasant, and how women are required to be relentlessly pleasant. And what's interesting about your evolution, it isn't just a pivot, Gloria. You went from having a position of the MRS, the mom of 3 kids, to the mouthpiece of an organization that is polarizing. I'm sure it was very difficult, and that's the story that's so interesting. In coaching young girls in sports, they often say that you can't teach aggression. Girls either have it or they don't. And if you squash it, it goes away. Your organization, your message has been to bring out this leadership in women that it must be quite hard to do at older ages. I mean, we talk about the concept of ageism. And what's interesting when we talk about your life being somewhat going backwards, you really show that ageism was no factor here. What is the message that you say to these women to bring out their leadership qualities when you're doing these seminars, such as the No Excuses and the
Take the Lead?
Take the Lead.
Well, it's kind of amusing because one of the things that we are never told is that pretty much with every decade, there are new opportunities and new experiences. I remember when I was recruited to take the National Planned Parenthood job, I was 53, I guess. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm too old to do this.
That crept into your mind.
It turned out that was the most perfect time in life to take on a complex, complicated organization because my children were grown and I had tremendous energy. And I had the value of the experience that I had had in leading other organizations. And who knew? I mean, I wouldn't have known that.
But don't you think that to some extent, with age, actually comes more comfort with power and speaking up? Whether
yes.
It's to authority figures or just to doctors and telling them they're wrong or to think about it a different way, that with age and experience, you become more comfortable with that.
If we have taken the time to know ourselves, and that's why my first leadership tool in intentioning is uncover yourself. If we have taken the time to really get to know ourselves and what our deepest values are and what all the things that we might not have wanted to show the world, we are willing to let the world know who we are in full. If we are able to do that, then we are completely comfortable in our own skin. And when you're comfortable in your own skin, you don't have to give a flip what anybody else thinks about you. You can then keep your eye on your own North Star and do what you think is right and what gives you joy and passion in this world.
Can you think of one of your hardest days in your job working for Planned Parenthood, hardest decisions, something where it made you uncomfortable and you prevailed?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. There were so many of them. How do I even begin? I'm going to say that the hardest really were not the external battles, which is what most people assume. I learned to deal with those fairly quickly and easily, not easily necessarily it was easy to do, but it was natural for me because of the experience I had with, not being the usual suspect that people were expecting. But what was really hard for me was dealing with internal politics and dealing with a situation where some of our own affiliates were attempting to create an internal, I'm going to just say it straight out, they were attempting to create an internal business for themselves that would have destroyed the financial model that most of the affiliates worked with. And I had to take a stand, and I prevailed, and I used up most every chip I had left. And it was actually at that moment that I knew that I needed to start making my exit.
So it sounded like you had to take a position and you had to be tough and you had to be the opposite of relentlessly pleasant. Is that what was difficult about that, taking that stance? I mean, leadership can be hard. Not everyone's going to like you.
There are what I call moral crossroads. When you have to decide, are you going to take the easy path or are you going to take the path that you know is the right path to take? And I think many leaders today are very much in that space. And we see the pandemic, for example, has unearthed so many things, so many disruptions, and it's causing so many leaders today to really have to think about, okay, has our whole model been wrong for families all this time? We can now see that it's possible for people to have much more flexibility in their work than we used to think they could. Do we need to completely change how we do business? What about the pressures that many times CEOs are feeling from their staff to take a position on, for example, racial justice issues. Those are things that many leaders have not had to deal with in the past, and they have to deal with them today. They have to take what I would call those moral crossroads stands. People do follow people with a point of view, though, and that's what I want to reassure people about. It's like, it may be hard to take tough choices, take tough positions, but people follow people who have a point of view. Explain what your values are, and people will appreciate that.
And is that part of intentioning, that you know what you want to do and you're going to, that the moral decisions are part of my intention, or is that different?
To me, it's very seamless. It's all part of. It's very seamless. It's all part of. It's all part of the human being. And when we are aligned with our values and our behaviors, life is much easier.
Now, we started off saying that you had a commitment to get women into leadership positions 50-50 by 2025. The statistics are that women were doing better. I think we were at like 30-something%, at least before the pandemic, and then the numbers dropped down. Is that right?
Some say that the pandemic has set women back by 10 years. We were at about 25% of the top leadership positions when the pandemic began in 2020. I haven't seen a big meta study yet, so it's hard to say exactly what the numbers are. But I also believe that because the pandemic has caused such disruption in the model of management and leadership and business structure, that if we play our cards right, we can move further faster and get back on track. And I do believe we can achieve that goal. The numbers are with us. Companies that have more women in their leadership make more money. The business case is clear.
Definitely. And even we've been with groups of women in this, pandemic, where the tough choices mean who's going to stay home with the children. So if you have the second career where you earn less, you're going to take a back seat to your partner whose salary pays the mortgage. This is the story we're hearing. And it's hopefully we can all you've called this a massive disruption that allows us to take opportunities. Hopefully the message will be heard.
But I'd like to pivot a little about that leadership and how to combine that career objective with family and life demands. Because if you want to make it to leadership positions, that typically requires a lot of work, extra hours, lots of energy, and you've got other obligations. What advice do you have for those who are starting out on that path?
One of the other things that nobody tells young women is that the higher you go on the leadership level, actually the more control you have over what your schedule is.
This is The Balanced Dilemma. We're speaking with Gloria Feldt.
What happens to women the higher they go up on the leadership ladder?
The more control they can have over their schedules and their lives. And I don't think that people tend to know that. It's not generally shared. I think that there is a narrative out there, and I honestly think it's a narrative that is designed to, quote, keep women in their place, close quote. And that narrative is constantly beating the drum, saying, you can't have it all, you can't do this, you will not be happy, you will not, all of life is a series of choices. Everybody has to make choices every single day about what they will do and what they won't do. It's no different for women. And we all, if we're lucky, have fairly long lives these days. And so we can have one way of living at one part of our life, and we can have another set of priorities at another part of our lives. And let me elaborate on that second piece just for a moment here, which is that one of the things that needs to change in our business systems and the way our companies are organized is that people need, both men and women, need to be able to step out for a while if they need to and come back without losing their place in the organization. And if there's a financial issue around that, then there need to be ways for people to stay on top of their profession. I see a lot of law firms doing that, for example, when women take a year out to do child care or elder care And it's not impossible to come up with ways for people to step out and step back in. We see many more men these days who want to be an integral part of their children's lives, too. That is a huge positive, and that gives us allies we've never had before.
But if I hear you correctly,
yes.
You're saying that it's a concept we've begun to discuss of periodizing your life, doing different things at different times. The problem is that once you have a resume and it's showing you had this job for this long and this position for this long, there's an expectation that it's a mounting, path. If you step out, there's this rumor on the street that you're going to lose your place. And what we're seeing now with the pandemic is hopefully a change in that, and that people will be able to do different things at different times, work a little more, work a little less, take different opportunities. And Maura, that brings us to one of our favorite questions.
Should you put motherhood on your resume, whether that you took time off or the skills you developed?
I will say that nothing taught me more than raising 3 children. Nothing taught me more than that. And I say that all the time. And I tell women when they ask the question about what am I going to do to show, how am I going to explain this gap in my resume? I'll just say, put parenthood on your resume. Absolutely. There's a skill set. You have to have organizational skills. You have to learn to deal with crises that happen every day. You have to be much more flexible. There's just nothing that teaches you more.
Well, it's certainly crisis management all the time. Given what you said about leadership, higher level positions giving more flexibility, do you think women should delay having children till they reach that level of leadership?
I think that's a really tough question. I think that every woman has to figure that one out for herself, because there is much to be said for having children when you're younger. Your body is more ready for it, for example, and it's, of course, easier to become pregnant, easier to carry a pregnancy. But there's no one right way. And so I think our society needs to basically give women a multiplicity of choices, and men a multiplicity of choices, and different people will find different things that will be right for them. I think about sometimes, what if I had had my children when I was much older? I know I would have been a better parent than I was as a teenager, but you don't have to be 40 years old either. So I think that really what needs to happen is our structures of society need to change. It's not like having children is anything new in this world. It's not. How would our institutions be formed if women had created them in the first place? And if we start thinking about it that way and just rethink our institutions to begin with, I think we can see that people can have a different kind of flexibility in their lives, and it's not going to hurt them, and it's not going to hurt organizations either.
Let me ask it from the other way, though. Is it ever too late? We're talking second acts, third acts, and the children are grown. What are your thoughts on that? Is it too late to become CEO of some big corporation if you've stepped out for a while, or even not, but you're on the older side? Ageism a factor?
I don't think it's ever too late to become a leader in any organization, whether it's a CEO or some other. I was close to 70 when I co-founded Take the Lead, so it wasn't what I had intended to do. But on the other hand, I'm having a great time building an organization. It's whatever you have the passion and the energy for. And, again, it's about knowing yourself and knowing what really is your core value and what gives you strength, what gives you energy, and go with that.
And at some point it becomes, and this is advice I've heard given to men and women, create the job that you want as opposed to looking for one in some existing company or some existing spot.
Great advice. Yeah, no, I think actually, we're talking about the great resignation right now, and the companies are scrambling to try to get women back into the workforce, trying to retain the talent that they've had, and both men and women are leaving the workforce. But I think the biggest competition companies have is not from other companies now, and not from people just bailing out of the workforce. It's from people deciding they're going to start their own companies so that they can have control over their lives.
Now, you've said and written that the pandemic is a great opportunity. Is this putting a positive spin on a crappy situation, or do you really think that there's really an opportunity here.
One of my leadership power tools from No Excuses, the No Excuses book, is Carpe the Chaos. And the truth is that most innovation, and it comes in times of disruption. And if you realize that our institutions are like amoebas, and they have to change too. They have to change just like everything. Animals have to evolve to live within their environment. Organizations have to evolve too. So it is a time when things can change, when we can advance positive change much more quickly than we could have at any other time. And before things get ossified again.
This brings us to the other half of the equation, our partners, and which are often men, but not always. And you've spoken out on paternity leave, and it's a take it or leave it situation. And how do you feel about that? How are men part of this formula? You've also mentioned that some of the best mentors you've had in your experience were male mentors, and how important it is that men mentor women.
Well, I certainly didn't have any female CEO role models, frankly, when I was first a CEO. And so it was really important for me to have men who were mentoring me. And and I think that it is still true today that because men hold the majority of the highest power positions, that it's incumbent upon them, if those men who believe in gender equality, and frankly, most of the men who have daughters do, they have an obligation to help mentor women along and bring them up the pipeline. But representation is also important. And the more we see women in leadership, the more it becomes normalized, the more women and men see women's leadership skills. And what I'm hoping is that women don't lose the characteristics that make us good leaders, that are the reasons why companies with more women in their leadership are more profitable. And that is women have more empathy. Women are able to read the room better because they haven't been the ones in power. It's been a survival mechanism. And so there are some skills that women have that have been devalued in many instances that have become our superpowers. And that's what I hope we will build on, and that's what I see as being the hope for the future.
And Gloria, I just want to take a minute to tell our listeners, they can find us on the web at thebalancedilemma.com, where you can listen to old episodes and sign up for our newsletter. You can find show announcements, show notes, resources, and further reading. You can follow us on social media at The Balanced Dilemma Podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. And our podcast episodes are available for listening on all places where you listen to your podcasts, Apple iTunes, Google, Spotify. And your organization can be found at www.takethelead.com. And you also have your own website.
And the intentioningbook.com.
Yes, actually, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Take the Lead's website is taketheleadwomen.com.
Yes, thank you.
Just to be clear, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at intentioningbook.com, you can get a free workbook and free audible chapter of your book, Intentioning. Take the Lead also has an online course, and that's at courses.taketheleadwomen.com/online course for those who are interested.
So, Gloria, we need to find out this final question that we ask all our guests. Can you have it all and all at the same time?
Well, Christie and Maura, I think, as I said before, that all of life is a series of choices. And we can have what we want. We can all have what we want. And that's really the key. And not to beat ourselves up for not having what somebody else might think is all. And what is all for me might be very different than what all is for you. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain telling you not to be happy because you don't have something. You get to choose. That's the whole point here. You get to choose what all is for you. And you have to choose. And sometimes that's hard. But you have to choose and make conscious decisions. You have to make intentioning decisions about what is all for you. And then you can go have that.
Thank you for joining us, Gloria Feldt. This is The Balanced Dilemma. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christie Derrico. Thank you, Gloria.